You're not trying to help us, Helen. My daughter-in-law Vanessa laughed at the family barbecue. You're just desperate to stay in our lives. Everyone went quiet. Even my own son looked away while she joked about me paying their mortgage, like some lonely old woman begging for attention. I smiled, grabbed my purse, and left without another word. But that night, I checked the county property records and found something strange. 3 refinances. Maxed out credit cards. Missed mortgage payments Daniel knew nothing about. And the next morning, the bank called me by mistake asking if I was still willing to save the house before foreclosure started. You're not trying to help us, Helen, my daughter-in-law Vanessa said loudly enough for everyone at the barbecue to hear. You're just desperate to stay relevant in our lives. A few people laughed nervously. Someone coughed into their drink. My son Daniel stared down at his paper plate like the macaroni salad suddenly required his full attention. And just like that, after 68 years of living, after raising a son mostly on canned soup and overtime paychecks, after burying my husband with my own trembling hands 3 winters ago, I became the pathetic old woman begging for attention at a family cookout. The July heat pressed heavily against my skin that afternoon. The kind of thick suburban heat that made the air smell like charcoal smoke, sunscreen, and fresh-cut grass. Vanessa had decorated their backyard beautifully. White lanterns hung from the wooden fence. A blue tablecloth covered the picnic tables. Their neighbors moved around carrying paper cups filled with lemonade and beer while country music drifted softly through hidden speakers near the patio doors. From the outside, it looked like one of those happy American family gatherings people post online with captions about gratitude and togetherness. But family gatherings can become dangerous places when humiliation is served quietly between the hamburgers and potato salad. I should have known better the moment I arrived. Vanessa hugged everyone except me. Not openly enough for anyone to call it rude, of course. She simply smiled from a distance and said, "Helen made it," the same way someone might announce that rain had arrived unexpectedly during a parade. Daniel kissed my cheek quickly before rushing back toward the grill. My grandson Tyler barely looked up from his phone. Only my granddaughter Emily came over and wrapped her arms around me properly. "You look pretty today, Grandma," she whispered softly. I thanked her and smoothed down the front of my pale green blouse. It was the same blouse Frank always loved on me. He used to say green made my eyes look younger. I still wore his wedding ring on a chain around my neck because my fingers had become too thin for it after he passed. Some days I touched that ring so often it felt less like jewelry and more like a life raft. I spent most of the afternoon quietly helping where I could. I refilled trays of chips, wiped ketchup off the folding table, picked up napkins blowing across the yard. Old habits. Mothers never really stop working inside their own families, even when nobody notices anymore. Around 6 o'clock, I overheard, "Survived because family helped family back then." Nobody turned compassion into humiliation. So when dinner plates were finally passed around and everyone settled into lawn chairs beneath the string lights, I made the mistake of speaking from the heart. "Daniel," I said gently, "if things are difficult right now, I could help with the mortgage for a while." Silence arrived instantly. Not total silence. The music still played softly somewhere behind us. A dog barked down the street. Ice clinked inside someone's glass. But emotionally, the silence felt enormous. Vanessa slowly lowered her fork onto her plate and looked directly at me with that polished smile she used whenever she wanted to wound someone without appearing cruel. "That's sweet, Helen," she said. "But we're not exactly looking for charity." "I didn't mean charity," I replied quietly. "I just thought family should help each other sometimes." Vanessa laughed then. Not loudly. Worse. Softly. Deliberately. Like I'd said something embarrassing at a business dinner. "You know," she announced while glancing toward her friends, "I think Helen just misses being needed." A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the table. My stomach tightened immediately. But she kept going. Honestly, every time there's a problem, she tries to swoop in and save the day. She took a sip of wine before adding the sentence that burned itself permanently into my memory. "It's kind of desperate when you think about it." I looked toward Daniel then. I truly did. Some foolish part of me still expected my son to say something. Anything. "Mom's just trying to help. Don't speak to her like that." Enough. But Daniel only rubbed his forehead and stared down at his plate. That hurt more than Vanessa's words ever could. Because silence from strangers means nothing. Silence from your own child changes the shape of your heart. Nobody spoke after that. Emily looked horrified. Tyler pretended not to notice. Vanessa calmly continued eating her grilled chicken while conversation slowly restarted around her like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just been reduced to a lonely old woman begging for importance. I smiled politely because women my age were raised to survive humiliation quietly. Then I stood up and said I suddenly remembered I had an early doctor's appointment in the morning. Vanessa told me to drive safely in the same cheerful tone cashiers use with customers they'll never remember. Daniel walked me halfway to my car but never apologized. Mom, he sighed, you know how Vanessa jokes sometimes. I nodded slowly. Of course. But jokes are supposed to make people laugh together. Not isolate one person until they feel invisible. The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights blurred softly through my windshield while old songs played low on the radio. I kept replaying the moment in my head over and over. Desperate. Such an ugly word. Especially when spoken about a woman who spent 35 years sacrificing quietly for everyone sitting at that table. When I finally pulled into my garage, I didn't get out right away. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel while the engine ticked softly in the dark. My reflection in the windshield looked tired. Smaller somehow. Older than 68. But underneath the sadness, something else had started forming quietly inside me. Not anger exactly. Clarity. Because Vanessa's reaction hadn't felt normal. It felt defensive. Sharp. Panicked even. And suddenly I remembered something Emily mentioned 2 weeks earlier while helping me carry groceries into my kitchen. Dad's been getting weird phone calls lately, she'd said absent-mindedly. Mom always grabs the phone before he can answer. At the time, I ignored it. Families have private matters. But now, sitting alone in my dark garage while the smell of barbecue smoke still clung faintly to my blouse, I realized something important. People who are truly secure don't humiliate others for offering help. And women hiding financial disasters often attack the first person who gets too close to the truth. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise with the strange heaviness that comes after humiliation settles into memory. For a few quiet seconds, lying there beneath the pale blue quilt Frank and I bought during our 20th anniversary trip to Vermont, I almost forgot what happened at the barbecue. Then Vanessa's voice returned to me instantly. Desperate. The words sat in my chest like something sour. I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly above my bed while weak morning light slipped through the curtains. My house always felt the loneliest around 6 in the morning. That used to be Frank's hour. He would wake first, shuffle into the kitchen in his slippers, and start the coffee before the sun came up. Sometimes I still imagined hearing the soft clink of his coffee mug against the counter. Grief changes shape over time. In the beginning, it crashes over you like a wave. Later, it becomes quieter. Smaller. A missing sound. An empty chair. A second cup never poured. I got out of bed carefully and wrapped my robe tighter around myself before walking downstairs. The hardwood floor creaked beneath my feet exactly the way it always had. Some sounds survive longer than people do. I stood in the kitchen making oatmeal while the local morning news played softly on the television. Humidity warnings. Traffic updates. A story about rising grocery prices. Ordinary life continuing as usual while my own thoughts spiraled somewhere darker. I kept replaying the expression on Vanessa's face from the night before. Not just cruel. Alarmed. There had been fear underneath her laughter. I knew that look because I had worn it myself years ago when Frank and I were drowning in bills after his back injury. Fear makes people sharp. Defensive. Sometimes meaner than they intend to be. But something about Vanessa's reaction still felt wrong. Around 7:30, I carried my coffee onto the back porch and sat in the old white rocking chair Frank built for me nearly 15 years ago. The summer air already felt warm against my skin. Birds chirped somewhere near the maple trees lining the fence, and a neighbor's sprinkler clicked rhythmically across the lawn next door. Peaceful suburban sounds. The kind of morning people imagine older women enjoying peacefully after retirement. But peace becomes difficult when your instincts start whispering that something is deeply off inside your own family. I thought about Daniel constantly lately. At 42, he looked older than Frank ever did. At that age, stress had settled permanently around his eyes. Even his posture changed over the past year. Slightly hunched now, like he carried invisible weight everywhere he went. Vanessa, meanwhile, somehow always looked polished. Fresh highlights, designer handbags, expensive manicures every few weeks. She posted cheerful photographs online from wineries, restaurants, and weekend getaways while Daniel quietly worked overtime shifts at the engineering firm. Maybe none of that meant anything. Plenty of couples manage money differently. But once suspicion enters your mind, old memories begin rearranging themselves into new shapes. Suddenly, small moments from the past year return to me differently. Last Christmas, Daniel hesitated awkwardly when I handed Emily a small envelope with $200 for college savings. Vanessa immediately stepped forward and said, "Oh, we are keeping all financial gifts in one account now." At Easter, Tyler mentioned they stopped using the upstairs guest room because Mom says the bank appraiser might come back. Back then, I ignored it. Families have complicated finances. But now those little comments pressed against each other inside my head like puzzle pieces finally connecting. After breakfast, I decided to distract myself by organizing paperwork in the hallway cabinet. Frank used to handle most of our finances before he passed, but during the past 3 years I learned how to manage everything myself. Insurance forms, property taxes, retirement statements. Widowhood forces women into responsibilities nobody prepares them for. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang unexpectedly. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another robocall about Medicare plans or car warranties. But something made me answer. "Hello." There was a brief pause before a professional female voice spoke carefully. "Good morning. Is this Mrs. Helen Whitmore?" "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. This is Karen from Coastal Valley Lending. I am following up regarding the property on Briarwood Lane." My stomach tightened immediately. Briarwood Lane was Daniel's address. "I think you may have the wrong number," I said slowly. "This is Daniel Whitmore's mother." Another pause followed. Paper shuffled faintly in the background. "Oh, I apologize. Your number is listed as the secondary contact connected to the file." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter instinctively. "What kind of file?" The woman's voice became more cautious. "I am sorry, ma'am. I may have reached out in error." But by then, my pulse had already started racing. "Is my son all right?" I asked quietly. "Has something happened?" No, she replied quickly. "Nothing like that. We are simply trying to discuss urgent payment arrangements regarding the mortgage account." Mortgage. The word landed heavily in my chest. I stared out the kitchen window toward my quiet backyard while silence stretched between us. Finally, the woman sighed softly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I truly should not discuss account details, but we have been unable to reach your son directly for several weeks." "Several weeks?" "Yes, ma'am." My fingers tightened around the phone. "How behind are they?" Another pause. 92 days. I closed my eyes immediately. 92 days. 3 months. The beginning of serious trouble. The beginning of foreclosure warnings. I knew because Frank and I once came terrifyingly close ourselves. "I understand," I whispered. "Thank you." After the call ended, I remained standing motionless in my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed quietly beside me while sunlight spilled across the countertops. Everything around me looked painfully normal. A bowl of peaches near the sink. Emily's birthday card still displayed beside the microwave. Frank's old reading glasses sitting untouched near the newspaper rack. But inside me, something shifted permanently. Vanessa was not simply embarrassed about money problems. She was hiding them. Hiding them aggressively enough to humiliate anyone who came too close. Suddenly, the barbecue scene looked completely different. Her laughter. Her defensiveness. Daniel's silence. None of it was random. She was protecting something fragile and dangerous. I walked slowly toward the dining room and sat at the table Frank refinished by hand decades ago. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier. Outside, the neighborhood continued peacefully. Mail trucks rolled past. Lawnmowers buzzed in the distance. But I could not stop thinking about one detail from the phone call. My number was listed as secondary contact on the mortgage file. Daniel put me there, not Vanessa. Which meant at some point, quietly and without telling her, my son still trusted me enough to leave a door open in case everything fell apart. And mothers notice those tiny silent cries for help long before anyone else does. For the rest of that afternoon, I tried convincing myself not to overreact. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the bank had exaggerated the situation. Maybe Daniel already had everything under control and simply forgot to remove my number from old paperwork. But deep down, I already knew the truth older women learn after decades of marriage, motherhood, and disappointment. Your instincts rarely panic without reason. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store because sitting alone inside my house had become unbearable. The parking lot shimmered beneath the summer heat while shopping carts rattled across the pavement. Inside, the air conditioning blasted cold against my skin, carrying the familiar smell of bakery bread and floor cleaner. Ordinary places can feel strangely comforting after emotional humiliation because strangers do not expect anything from you. They do not measure your worth by how useful you still are to their lives. I moved slowly through the aisles, picking up things I did not really need. Strawberries. Soup. A fresh loaf of sourdough bread. Near the dairy section, I noticed a young mother kneeling beside her little boy, patiently helping him choose yogurt flavors. He wrapped his tiny arms around her neck afterward, like she was the safest place in the world. I had to look away suddenly because memories arrived too fast sometimes. Daniel used to do that in grocery stores when he was little. If he got scared or tired, he would reach for my hand immediately without hesitation. Children trust their mothers before the world teaches them otherwise. By the time I returned home, the sky had turned pale gray with approaching rain clouds. I carried my groceries inside carefully, then stopped when I noticed a black SUV parked across the street near my mailbox. A man wearing a polo shirt sat inside holding paperwork against the steering wheel. The moment he saw me looking, he glanced away quickly and drove off. Maybe coincidence. But something about it unsettled me deeply. Late that afternoon, Emily called unexpectedly. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. Her voice sounded nervous. "Did I catch you at a bad time?" "Never." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table while twisting the phone cord around my fingers out of old habit, even though cordless phones replaced those years ago. Some gestures stay inside your body forever. "I was just checking on you," she continued carefully. "After the barbecue." I smiled faintly despite myself. Emily always noticed emotional shifts nobody else acknowledged. "I am all right, sweetheart." Silence lingered for a moment before she sighed quietly. "Mom should not have said that stuff." I did not answer immediately because criticizing parents in front of children always feels dangerous, no matter how old the child becomes. "Adults say hurtful things sometimes," I replied gently. Emily lowered her voice. "Grandma, things have been weird here for a while." My chest tightened instantly. "What do you mean?" Another pause. I could hear footsteps moving in the background of her house, cabinet doors closing somewhere nearby. Then her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Dad keeps getting calls from numbers he does not recognize, and Mom always takes his phone away after. Last week they had this huge fight because he wanted to open some bank letter that came in the mail." I stared silently out the kitchen window while rain finally began tapping softly against the glass. "Did you hear what they argued about?" "Not really," Emily admitted. But Dad kept asking why things were hidden from him. Hidden. That word settled heavily into my stomach. "Emily," I said carefully, "has your father seemed all right lately?" She answered too quickly. No, the honesty in that single word hurt more than I expected. "He barely sleeps anymore. Sometimes I hear him walking around downstairs at like 3 in the morning." I closed my eyes briefly because I remembered Frank doing the same thing during our hardest financial years. Men often carry shame differently than women. Women talk through fear. Men pace in silence, pretending everything remains manageable until it nearly destroys them. "And Mom keeps shopping," Emily continued softly. "Packages come every day." I thought about Vanessa's expensive handbags again. The salon appointments. The winery photographs online. Carefully curated happiness, while overdue mortgage notices piled somewhere hidden beneath kitchen counters and locked drawers. Do not worry yourself too much, sweetheart, I told her gently. Adults eventually work things out. But even as I said the words, they sounded false. After we hung up, I sat motionless for a long time listening to the rain. My house suddenly felt too quiet again. Frank would have known exactly what to do in situations like this. He possessed that rare ability to see through people without becoming cruel himself. Once, years ago, after Daniel's first serious girlfriend lied about borrowing money, Frank simply told me, "Some people spend more energy protecting appearances than protecting truth." At the time, I barely understood what he meant. Now I understood perfectly. Around 7 o'clock that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded exhausted. "Hi, honey. Listen, about yesterday." I waited quietly. Vanessa did not mean anything by it. There it was. Not an apology. An explanation. Mothers learn the difference quickly. "I see." Daniel sighed heavily into the phone. "Things are stressful right now." "I know." Silence followed immediately after those words. I could almost hear his breathing change. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. I walked slowly toward the living room window while watching rain slide down the glass in long, crooked lines. "Daniel," I said carefully, "are you in trouble financially?" He did not answer right away. And sometimes silence tells the truth more clearly than words ever could. Finally, he laughed weakly. "Who told you that?" "Nobody." Another long pause stretched between us. Then, quietly almost, ashamed, he admitted, "Things are a little tight right now." Tight. Such a small word for something large enough to swallow entire families. "How tight?" I asked softly. I heard movement in the background. A door closing quickly. Lowered voices. Then Daniel spoke again, but now his voice sounded careful, rehearsed somehow. "It is temporary. Vanessa has everything under control." Under control. The same phrase people use right before everything collapses. "Daniel," I whispered gently, "you can tell me the truth." His breathing caught slightly. For one brief second, I thought he might finally open up completely. Instead, Vanessa's voice suddenly appeared loudly in the background. "Who are you talking to?" Silence. Then Daniel answered quickly, "Nobody." "Mom." Her tone changed immediately. Sharper now. Alert. "Tell her we are fine." I stood perfectly still beside the rain-covered window while something cold moved slowly through my chest. Not sadness anymore. Certainty. Because healthy people do not monitor conversations like that. Healthy marriages do not sound afraid of simple questions. "Mom," Daniel said awkwardly, "I should go." "Of course. And please do not worry, all right?" But worry had already passed hours ago. What remained now was something much heavier. The understanding that my son was sinking while pretending to swim. And somewhere inside that beautiful suburban house with white lanterns and polished family photographs, Vanessa was working desperately to make sure nobody saw how deep the water really was. That night, I barely slept. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows long after midnight while memories drifted through my mind like old photographs scattered across a table. Some people think getting older makes life easier because you become wiser. But wisdom often just means recognizing patterns sooner. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and walked downstairs wrapped in my cream-colored robe. The house felt cool and silent except for the refrigerator humming faintly in the kitchen. I made chamomile tea the same way Frank liked it, with a little honey stirred slowly into the cup. Old habits survive grief because they give lonely people structure. I carried the tea into the living room and sat beside the bookshelf where framed family photographs covered nearly every surface. Daniel at age 8 holding a fishing pole twice his size. Emily wearing her middle school graduation gown. Tyler smiling awkwardly with braces during one Thanksgiving dinner. And there, near the center, sat the wedding photograph Vanessa loved posting online every anniversary. She looked radiant in satin and lace beneath golden church lights, while Daniel stared at her like he had won the lottery. I studied that photograph for a long time. It is strange how differently you see people once trust begins cracking. Suddenly you notice details that once seemed harmless. The way Vanessa always positioned herself slightly in front of Daniel during photographs. The way she gripped his arm possessively. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes whenever someone else became the center of attention. At first, I blamed myself for being unfair. Mothers and daughters-in-law have complicated relationships sometimes. Different generations. Different personalities. But over the years, certain moments stayed with me because they carried the same quiet pattern underneath them. Small humiliations. Tiny exclusions. Polite little wounds disguised as misunderstandings. I remembered Emily's 10th birthday party when I arrived early to help decorate the backyard. Vanessa looked startled to see me and quickly said, "Oh, I already hired someone for setup." Hired someone. As though the grandmother of the birthday girl had become unnecessary labor instead of family. Then there was Thanksgiving 3 years ago when she changed dinner plans at the last minute and forgot to tell me. I sat alone at my dining table beside a turkey large enough for 8 people while the rest of the family ate at her sister's house across town. Daniel apologized afterward, of course. He always apologized afterward. Quietly. Weakly. Never in the moment things actually mattered. Looking back now, I realized something painful. Vanessa never attacked openly until she felt fully secure. Manipulative people work slowly. Carefully. They remove support systems one small piece at a time until the victim begins doubting their own importance. By morning, exhaustion settled heavily behind my eyes. I showered, dressed, and decided I needed fresh air before my thoughts consumed me completely. Around 10 o'clock, I drove toward downtown Warwick where Frank and I used to spend Saturday mornings browsing antique stores and small bookstores together. The sky looked washed clean after the rainstorm, and sunlight reflected brightly off storefront windows as people moved along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups and shopping bags. Life always looks normal from the outside, even while families quietly fall apart behind closed doors. I stopped at a small cafe near Main Street and ordered coffee with a blueberry muffin. The young barista smiled warmly and called me sweetheart while handing me my receipt. Such tiny kindnesses matter more as you age. Older women become invisible in strange ways. People either dismiss you entirely or expect endless emotional labor from you while offering very little in return. I chose a table near the window and opened my purse to pull out my checkbook because I still balanced accounts manually every week. Frank used to tease me about it, but I trusted paper records more than phone apps and passwords. As I flipped through the register absent-mindedly, something suddenly caught my attention. 6 months earlier, I had written Daniel a check for $2,000 after he mentioned unexpected home repairs. At the time, he looked embarrassed accepting it. Vanessa barely thanked me. Instead, she joked that owning a large house was basically financial warfare now. But suddenly I realized something important. $2,000 should not disappear that quickly if the problem was simply plumbing repairs or appliance replacements. Especially not for a couple earning 2 professional incomes. Unless the financial damage underneath was already much larger. My thoughts were interrupted when someone gently called my name. Helen. I looked up to see Patricia Reynolds standing beside my table holding an iced coffee. Patricia and I attended the same church years ago before her husband relocated for work. We had not spoken in nearly a year. Patricia, I smiled politely. What a surprise. She sat down after asking permission and immediately lowered her voice slightly. I hope you do not mind me saying this, but I saw Daniel recently. My stomach tightened. Really? Patricia nodded carefully. At the bank. Every nerve inside me suddenly sharpened. Patricia worked at Coastal Valley Bank. Not the lending department exactly, but close enough. He looked exhausted, she continued gently. Honestly, Helen, I almost did not recognize him at first. I stared down at my untouched muffin while trying to keep my expression neutral. Work stress, probably. Patricia hesitated. Maybe. Then she added quietly, but people usually do not sit in loan offices for 3 hours because of work stress. My heartbeat slowed strangely. Not faster. Slower. Like my body had finally stopped fighting the truth. What kind of loan office? I asked softly. Patricia immediately looked uncomfortable. I really should not discuss private financial matters. Of course. She sighed and stirred her iced coffee slowly before speaking again. I only mentioned it because Daniel looked trapped somehow. Trapped. Another word that landed too accurately. We talked about other things after that. Church events. Retirement. Her new grandson in Connecticut. But my thoughts remained fixed elsewhere entirely. Daniel sitting alone inside a bank office for 3 hours. Mortgage calls. Hidden letters. Vanessa monitoring conversations. Expensive purchases continuing while overdue payments piled higher. The pattern was no longer blurry anymore. It was becoming frighteningly clear. When I returned home later that afternoon, I found an envelope tucked beneath my front door. No stamp. No return address. Just my name written across the front in hurried handwriting. Helen. My pulse quickened immediately. I carried it carefully into the kitchen before opening it beside the sink. Inside sat a single sheet of paper folded in half. I recognized the logo instantly. Coastal Valley Lending. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the page. Final notice of intent to proceed with foreclosure action. The amount overdue sat printed. Clearly beneath it in dark bold numbers. Nearly $32,000. I lowered myself slowly into a kitchen chair because my knees suddenly felt weak. $32,000 was not one missed payment. It was months of damage. Serious damage. Dangerous damage. But what truly made my stomach drop was the handwritten sentence scrawled across the bottom of the page in blue ink. I did not know who else to send this to. Please help your son before it is too late. For a long time, I simply sat there staring at the foreclosure notice while the kitchen clock ticked softly above the stove. $32,000. I kept rereading the number as though it might somehow shrink if I looked at it long enough. Outside, late afternoon sunlight stretched across my backyard, warm and golden against the grass Frank used to cut every Saturday morning without fail. The contrast felt surreal. Beautiful weather. Quiet neighborhood. Birds chirping near the fence. And somewhere less than 15 minutes away, my son's life was quietly collapsing beneath debts he could no longer hide. I folded the paper carefully instead of crumpling it because older people were raised to treat documents seriously. Paper trails mattered. They told truths people tried very hard to bury. I slipped the notice back into the envelope and carried it upstairs to my bedroom where I kept important records inside the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Frank bought that chest for me during our 10th anniversary after I admired one in a furniture store window. He said every family needed one safe place where important things stayed protected. Birth certificates. Insurance papers. Wedding photographs. Over the years, that chest became less about storage and more about stability. The one place in the house where life stayed organized even when everything else felt uncertain. As I placed the foreclosure notice beside Frank's old pension records, my eyes landed on another folder tucked beneath them. Daniel Whitmore. I had not opened it in years. Inside were all the little pieces mothers save without telling anyone. His report cards. Childhood drawings. Medical forms. The loan paperwork from his first used car after college. I smiled faintly remembering how proud he looked driving that dented Honda Civic home. He washed it every weekend like it was a luxury car. Back then, Daniel believed hard work solved everything. Honestly, so did I. Life teaches you later that hard work means very little when the wrong person controls your emotional blind spots. Around 6 o'clock, I decided to call him again. Not to confront him. Not yet. I simply needed to hear his voice. The phone rang 4 times before he answered, sounding distracted and tired. Hey, Mom. I closed my eyes briefly at the exhaustion in his tone. Hi, honey. Did I catch you at work? No. I just got home. In the background, I could hear cabinet doors shutting and Vanessa speaking sharply somewhere farther away inside the house. Did you eat dinner yet? I asked gently. Not really. Something about that answer broke my heart unexpectedly. Daniel always forgot to eat when stress consumed him. Even as a teenager during exams, he survived on coffee and granola bars until I practically forced meals into his hands. You should not skip meals, I said softly. He laughed weakly. You still sound exactly the same. And you still sound exhausted. Silence settled between us again. Not uncomfortable silence exactly. Sad silence. The kind that forms when two people both know the truth but neither feels ready to say it aloud. Finally, Daniel exhaled heavily. Mom, have you ever felt like you are trying to hold together something that keeps falling apart no matter what you do? My grip tightened around the phone immediately. Yes, I whispered honestly. Many times. Another long pause followed. Then, quietly, almost like he regretted saying it, Daniel admitted, I do not think I can keep up anymore. I stood motionless beside the bedroom window while evening shadows stretched across the lawn outside. Keep up with what? I asked carefully. He did not answer directly. Instead, he said something even more revealing. Everything costs more now. The house, school activities, insurance, credit cards, repairs. And every month it somehow gets worse. Credit cards. There it was again. The hidden pressure beneath. Everything else. Daniel, I said slowly, are you behind on the mortgage? I heard his breathing stop for half a second. Then movement. Quick footsteps approaching. Vanessa's voice appeared instantly in the background. Who is that? My mother. Her tone sharpened immediately. Again? Again. As though speaking to me had become suspicious behavior. Daniel, I said calmly before she could fully interrupt, you do not need to carry everything alone. But Vanessa had clearly reached him by then because his voice changed completely. Straighter. More guarded. Mom, I told you already. We are fine. Fine. Such a dangerous word. People say fine right before nervous breakdowns, divorces, bankruptcies, and funerals. Of course, I replied quietly. I just worry about you. Vanessa spoke loudly enough for me to hear her clearly now. Maybe if people stopped treating us like charity cases, we could actually breathe for 5 minutes. My chest tightened instantly, but I kept my voice calm. I never meant to insult anyone. No, she snapped coldly, you just like acting like we cannot survive without you. Daniel stayed silent again. That silence hurt more every single time. Not because he agreed with her completely. Worse. Because he lacked the strength to stop her. I ended the call politely a few minutes later and stood alone in my darkening bedroom afterward feeling emotionally drained in a way sleep could never fix. Frank once told me something after one particularly difficult year when his younger brother borrowed money repeatedly while his marriage slowly fell apart. He said, when someone becomes emotionally controlled inside a relationship, they stop defending the people they love because survival becomes their only focus. Back then, I thought he sounded cynical. Now I realized he was simply experienced. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from Emily. My stomach dropped immediately. I called her back before even brushing my hair. Grandma, she answered quickly, sounding breathless. Can you talk? Of course. Her voice lowered instantly. Dad and Mom had another fight last night. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. Are you all right? Yeah. She hesitated. But Grandma, I think Dad found something. Every nerve inside me sharpened. What do you mean? He was yelling about bank statements. I closed my eyes briefly. Did he say anything specific? Not really. But I heard him ask Mom why there were charges from places he had never heard of. Charges. My thoughts immediately returned to the expensive handbags, online shopping deliveries, salon appointments, and winery weekends. Small luxuries become dangerous addictions when people start using spending to maintain appearances they cannot actually afford. Emily continued quietly. Mom kept saying he was overreacting. And your father? He looked different. Different how? Another pause. Like he finally stopped believing her. Those words settled deep inside me because sometimes the beginning of truth looks exactly like exhaustion. Around noon, I drove toward Daniel's neighborhood without fully deciding why. Maybe I simply needed to see the house for myself. Maybe instinct pulled me there the same way mothers somehow know when their children are suffering even from miles away. As I turned onto Briarwood Lane, something immediately looked wrong. A white notice had been taped discreetly near the front door beside the mailbox. Official paper. Legal paper. The kind homeowners pretend not to notice, while praying neighbors do not look too closely. My chest tightened painfully. But what truly unsettled me was not the notice itself. It was the moving truck parked 2 houses down while a man in a navy polo shirt photographed Daniel's property from the sidewalk. I stayed parked halfway down Briarwood Lane with both hands gripping the steering wheel while the man in the navy polo continued photographing Daniel's house. The summer sun reflected sharply off the windshield of his SUV, making it difficult to see his face clearly, but I recognized the professional routine immediately. Measure. Photograph. Document. Years ago, when Frank and I nearly lost our first house, a bank representative came through our neighborhood the exact same way. Quiet. Efficient. Emotionally detached. Foreclosure turns homes into files long before families accept what is happening. I watched him circle slowly toward the front yard while pretending to check something on a tablet. The white notice beside the mailbox fluttered lightly in the breeze. Daniel's lawn looked uneven now, patches of yellow grass spreading near the walkway, where sprinklers probably had not run consistently in weeks. Little signs. Tiny neglected things people stop noticing once survival becomes more urgent than appearances. And yet somehow Vanessa still managed salon appointments and expensive handbags. The unfairness of it made my chest ache. I almost drove away then. Part of me still wanted to pretend this was not my responsibility. Daniel was a grown man, 42 years old, married, a father himself. But motherhood does not disappear simply because children become adults. Especially not when you can practically see them drowning from the shoreline. Before I could change my mind, the front door suddenly opened. Daniel stepped outside wearing wrinkled khakis and a pale blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled unevenly toward his elbows. Even from half a block away, he looked exhausted. Thinner somehow. Older than he had looked just a year earlier. He spotted the man near the mailbox immediately and froze. Then, slowly, humiliation spread visibly across his face. I recognized that expression too. Shame mixed with panic. The kind of expression people wear when private disasters become public. Daniel walked quickly toward the man, speaking low enough that I could not hear the conversation. But I could read body language perfectly well. The representative remained calm and professional while Daniel kept rubbing the back of his neck anxiously. Finally, the man handed him paperwork before returning to the SUV and driving away. Daniel stood alone in the driveway afterward, staring down at the papers for several seconds before pressing one hand against his forehead. Something inside me broke quietly then. Because for the first time since this all began, I stopped seeing him as a man making poor decisions. I saw my little boy again. The same little boy who used to cry silently whenever he felt like he disappointed someone. Before I could overthink it, I pulled my car toward the curb in front of the house. Daniel looked up immediately, startled. For one brief second, genuine fear crossed his face. Not anger. Fear. As though he worried I had somehow seen everything. I stepped out slowly into the heavy afternoon heat. "Mom," he asked awkwardly. "What are you doing here?" I glanced toward the folded paperwork still clenched in his hand. I was nearby. The lie sounded weak even to me. Daniel forced a tired smile that disappeared almost instantly. Up close, the dark circles beneath his eyes looked worse than ever. His wedding ring hung loose on his finger from weight loss. "You should have called first," he muttered. Called first. Funny how people say things like that when they are trying to hide collapse. I looked toward the house. Curtains closed despite the bright weather. Delivery boxes stacked near the garage door. One luxury clothing package still sitting unopened beside the porch swing. "Is Vanessa home?" I asked carefully. Daniel hesitated too long before answering. "No. She took Tyler shopping." "Shopping?" "Of course." "And Emily?" "At her friend's house." Silence settled between us while cicadas buzzed loudly from nearby trees. Finally, I looked directly at him. "Daniel," I said softly, "how bad is it?" His shoulders tensed immediately. "Mom, please do not lie to me." He stared down at the paperwork in his hands without answering. The wind lifted the edge of one page slightly, and for a split second I saw the words "Final Demand" printed across the top in bold red letters. My stomach tightened painfully. Daniel noticed where I was looking and folded the papers quickly. "It is complicated," he whispered. "No," I replied gently. "Complicated is when the dishwasher breaks during Christmas dinner. This is something else. He let out a weak breath that almost sounded like surrender. Then, without warning, he sat down heavily on the front steps like his legs simply gave out beneath him. I had not seen my son look defeated like that since the day Frank died. Slowly, I sat beside him. The concrete steps still radiated heat from the afternoon sun. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Across the street, someone mowed their lawn while children rode bicycles farther down the block. Normal suburban life continuing around us, while my son quietly unraveled beside me. Finally, Daniel rubbed both hands over his face and spoke so quietly I almost did not hear him. I do not know how it got this bad. There it was. The truth. Small. Fragile. Human. Tell me. He swallowed hard before speaking again. At first it was just credit cards. Then Vanessa refinanced the house because she said interest rates would improve our cash flow. Refinanced. My chest tightened immediately. How many times? Daniel looked ashamed. 3. I closed my eyes briefly. 3 refinances in less than 4 years usually meant desperation, not strategy. And the money? I asked carefully. He laughed bitterly then. Not loud. Just tired. That is the problem. What do you mean? Daniel stared straight ahead at the street. I honestly do not know where half of it went. A cold heaviness settled into my stomach. You do not control the accounts? Vanessa handles most of the finances. Handles. Such a dangerous word when paired with blind trust. Why? I asked quietly. Because she always said I stressed too much about money. She told me she was better at managing things. He looked down at his hands like he hated himself for what he was admitting. And honestly, I wanted to believe her. I understood that part completely. People do not surrender control because they are foolish. They surrender it because they are exhausted. Because they trust someone. Because love makes denial feel safer than conflict. When did you realize things were serious? I asked softly. Daniel gave another hollow laugh. When the bank started calling me directly instead of Vanessa. I stared at him carefully. She hid things from you. He nodded once. Statements. Notices. Late payments. Then he added the sentence that made my heart ache most of all. Mom, I think we have been pretending for a long time. Pretending. Yes. Pretending the shopping was normal. Pretending the vacations were affordable. Pretending expensive wine and designer handbags mattered more than peace of mind. Pretending the house itself was still a home instead of a performance. I reached over slowly and placed my hand on his arm. He looked so tired beneath the bright summer sunlight. So emotionally worn down. Daniel, I said gently, why did you not tell me? His eyes filled slightly then, though he blinked the emotion away immediately. Because after Dad died, you already lost enough. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear birds chirping somewhere near the fence and the distant hum of a lawnmower farther down the street. Then the front door behind us suddenly opened. Vanessa stepped outside carrying shopping bags in both hands. The moment she saw us sitting together on the front steps, her expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Panic. Vanessa froze at the edge of the driveway with glossy shopping bags hanging from both arms while the front door slowly swung shut behind her. For one brief second, nobody moved. The late afternoon sun hit the gold bracelets on her wrist, making them flash brightly against her tan skin. Expensive bracelets. Expensive sunglasses resting on top of perfectly styled blonde hair. Her entire appearance looked polished enough for a magazine advertisement. But her eyes gave her away instantly. Panic has a very specific look when someone suddenly realizes two people have started comparing truths. Helen, she said finally, forcing a smile so quickly it almost looked painful. What a surprise. I stood slowly from the front steps while Daniel remained seated beside me, shoulders slumped forward with exhaustion. Vanessa's eyes moved immediately toward the paperwork still clenched in his hand. I saw it happen. The calculation. The fear. The instant mental rearranging manipulative people do when they realize control is slipping. We were just talking, I said calmly. Vanessa laughed lightly, though nothing about it sounded natural. Well, hopefully not about boring financial stuff. Her tone carried that same polished edge she always used whenever she wanted to redirect a conversation without sounding aggressive. Daniel did not respond. He simply stared at the driveway. That silence clearly unsettled her more than anger would have. "Daniel," she asked carefully, "what is going on?" He looked up at her finally, and I noticed something different in his face immediately. Not confidence exactly. More like exhaustion becoming stronger than denial. "How much debt are we actually in?" he asked quietly. Vanessa's entire posture stiffened. "What?" "The truth." Her smile vanished completely now. "Why are we doing this outside?" "Because every time I ask inside, you tell me I am overreacting." The air between them changed instantly. Tighter. Colder. Like invisible cracks spreading through glass. Vanessa set the shopping bags down slowly near the porch. One tipped sideways, revealing tissue paper and a small black jewelry box from an expensive department store. My stomach tightened immediately. More spending. More pretending. "Daniel," she said carefully, lowering her voice the way people do when they want to sound calm while hiding anger underneath. "We already talked about this." "No," he replied quietly. "You talked. I listened." I glanced away toward the street because suddenly I felt like an accidental witness to years of buried resentment finally surfacing. Somewhere nearby, sprinklers clicked rhythmically across a neighbor's lawn while children laughed farther down the block. Ordinary sounds surrounding an extraordinary unraveling. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "I cannot believe this is happening because your mother decided to insert herself into our marriage." There it was. Not concern about the debt. Not concern about Daniel. Her first instinct was blame. "I did not insert myself," I said calmly. "The bank called me." For the first time since she arrived, Vanessa looked genuinely shaken. Just for a second. But I saw it clearly. "Why would they call you?" she asked sharply. "Apparently my number is listed as secondary contact." Daniel turned slowly toward her. "You told me you removed Mom's number last year." Silence. Tiny. Dangerous silence. Vanessa recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "I probably forgot," she snapped. "I have a million things to manage around here." "Like $32,000 in missed mortgage payments?" I asked softly before I could stop myself. The moment the number left my mouth, Daniel went completely still beside me. Vanessa stared at me as though I had physically struck her. "What?" Daniel whispered hoarsely. I closed my eyes briefly. "Too late now. I received a foreclosure notice anonymously yesterday." Daniel's face drained of color instantly. "Foreclosure?" Vanessa stepped forward immediately. "That is not what it sounds like." But even she no longer sounded convincing. Daniel stood up slowly from the steps. "You told me we were catching up." "We are trying to." "You said the refinancing bought us breathing room." "It did." "Then why are they threatening foreclosure?" Her breathing became uneven now. "Because interest rates changed and do not," he interrupted quietly. "Do not do that thing where you throw complicated words around until I stop asking questions." I stared at my son in silence because it was the first time in years I had heard him challenge her directly. Vanessa noticed it too. Fear flashed across her face again, sharper now. "You are acting like I did this alone," she snapped suddenly. "Everything I bought, everything I spent, it was for this family." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Jewelry is for the family?" Her eyes widened instantly toward the shopping bags near the porch. "You have no idea how hard it is trying to maintain appearances when everyone around us expects a certain lifestyle." That sentence settled heavily in the humid air. Maintain appearances. There it was. The real addiction underneath everything else. Not shopping itself. Image. Performance. The desperate need to look successful even while drowning privately behind closed doors. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "nobody cares about appearances more than peace." She turned toward me sharply. "Easy for you to say. You grew up in a completely different world." "No," I replied softly. "I grew up in a world where people did not lose their homes trying to impress neighbors." Daniel rubbed both hands over his face while pacing slowly near the driveway. He looked physically sick now. "How much debt is there besides the mortgage?" Vanessa hesitated. "Too long." "Vanessa." "Some credit cards." "How many?" "A few." "How many?" Her voice cracked slightly for the first time. 7. Daniel stopped pacing completely. 7 credit cards? I was juggling balances. How much? Tears suddenly filled her eyes, though something about them still felt defensive instead of remorseful. I do not know exactly. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. You do not know? Because every month I was trying to fix things before you found out. I understood that logic, unfortunately. Lies grow fastest inside panic. People convince themselves secrecy is temporary right until it destroys everything permanently. Mom, Daniel whispered suddenly, looking at me with visible shame. I think she opened accounts without telling me. Vanessa immediately shook her head. That is not fair. Then why are there charges from places I have never heard of? She looked away. Tiny movement. Tiny confession. The sun dipped lower across the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the driveway while tension thickened around us. Finally, Vanessa spoke again, but now her voice sounded smaller somehow. Less polished. I was trying to keep us from looking like failures. Daniel stared at her for a long moment before quietly asking the saddest question I had heard all week. At what point did appearances become more important than honesty? Vanessa did not answer. She simply stood there surrounded by expensive shopping bags while foreclosure notices waited inside the house behind her. And suddenly, for the very first time, I think she realized something terrifying. The performance was ending. The silence after Daniel's question felt heavier than the summer heat pressing down on the driveway. Vanessa stood perfectly still beside the shopping bags, her lips parted slightly as though she wanted to defend herself, but could not decide which version of the truth sounded safest anymore. Daniel looked at her with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger. Worse. Disillusionment. The slow, painful realization that the person beside you may not be who you spent years believing they were. Finally, Vanessa crossed her arms tightly and looked away toward the street. I did not do this to hurt anyone, she whispered. Daniel let out a hollow laugh under his breath. Then what exactly did you think? What happened? She looked back at him sharply. I thought I could fix it before things got bad. Things are already bad. Her voice suddenly cracked with frustration. You think I do not know that? I stayed quiet because some moments inside marriages become too raw for outside voices. But I watched carefully. People reveal themselves most clearly when control begins slipping away. Vanessa's polished confidence was cracking now in tiny visible pieces. Her breathing looked uneven. Her hands trembled slightly near the shopping bags. Even her makeup suddenly seemed too perfect against the panic building underneath it. Daniel looked down at the paperwork, still clenched in his hand. How many payments did you hide from me? Vanessa hesitated again. Vanessa. 4. He closed his eyes immediately. For months. I was trying to catch up. With what money? Her silence answered for her. The cicadas buzzed loudly from the trees surrounding the neighborhood, while somewhere farther down the block a garage door slowly opened. Life continuing normally around a family standing at the edge of collapse. Finally, Daniel looked toward me. Mom, can we go inside? I nodded quietly. The moment Vanessa realized I was being invited into the conversation instead of pushed out of it, something dark flickered across her face. Not jealousy exactly. Fear of losing influence. We entered the house slowly, and the tension inside felt immediate. The air smelled faintly of expensive candles and fresh paint, but underneath it lingered something else now. Stress. Stale anxiety. The emotional heaviness families carry when secrets have lived too long inside walls. I noticed details differently this time. Decorative furniture that looked barely used. Designer throw pillows arranged perfectly across the sectional sofa. A massive television mounted above the fireplace while unopened mail sat stacked carelessly on the kitchen counter nearby. Performance in every direction. Appearance over peace. Daniel sat heavily at the kitchen table while Vanessa remained standing near the island counter with both arms wrapped tightly around herself. I stayed quiet and waited because older women learn patience after enough years watching people circle around truths they are terrified to say directly. Eventually, Daniel spoke first. I want to see everything. Vanessa looked exhausted suddenly. Not tonight. Tonight. Daniel, please. No more hiding things. The firmness in his voice surprised even me. Vanessa noticed it too. Slowly, she walked toward a drawer near the refrigerator and pulled out a thick folder stuffed with unopened envelopes, account statements, and paperwork. The sound of it landing on the kitchen table felt strangely loud. Daniel stared at the pile like it physically hurt him. "How long?" he asked quietly. Vanessa sat down across from him now, though she still avoided eye contact. "About a year." "A year." Her eyes filled immediately. At first it was manageable. I looked down at the paperwork while trying not to react emotionally. Collection notices. Credit card balances. Past due reminders. Refinancing documents. Some envelopes remained unopened entirely, as though ignoring reality somehow delayed consequences. Frank used to say financial problems become dangerous the moment people stop opening mail. Daniel picked up one statement after another with visibly shaking hands. "What is Bellamy Jewelers?" Vanessa swallowed hard. "A bracelet." "For $1,000 for a bracelet?" I returned it. He flipped to another page. "And this?" "A resort deposit." "Vanessa." I canceled it. He looked up finally, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke my heart. "Then why do we still owe the money?" She had no answer. Because there never really is an answer once people become addicted to maintaining an image they can no longer afford. I watched Daniel carefully while he continued sorting through statements. Something inside him was changing with every page. The denial was disappearing. In its place came clarity. Painful clarity. Around us, the house remained perfectly staged. Family photographs lined the hallway. Vacation souvenirs decorated shelves. A framed sign near the dining room read "Blessed" in elegant cursive lettering. Funny how often people display words they no longer know how to live by. "What about the refinance money?" Daniel asked. Suddenly, Vanessa rubbed her temples. "Some paid debt. Some. I was trying to keep us afloat. Where did the rest go?" Her eyes drifted toward the luxury shopping bags still sitting near the front door. That tiny glance said everything. Daniel noticed it too. He leaned back slowly in his chair like all the air had left his body. "My God." Vanessa's voice turned defensive immediately. "Do not act innocent. You liked this life too." "I thought we could afford it. Because I made it look that way." There it was again. The performance. Carefully crafted. Carefully maintained. Built entirely on secrecy and illusion. Daniel covered his face with both hands while silence settled over the kitchen. I remembered him doing the same thing at age 12 after accidentally breaking Frank's fishing rod. Even then, guilt overwhelmed him physically. Some people carry emotional responsibility too deeply. Vanessa suddenly looked toward me then. "You probably think I am some terrible person." I met her eyes calmly. "No," she looked startled. "Then what?" I answered honestly. "I think you became more afraid of looking unsuccessful than of losing what actually mattered." Tears spilled down her cheeks instantly after that. Real tears this time. Not manipulative. Exhausted. "You do not understand," she whispered. Everywhere I looked, everyone seemed ahead of us. Bigger houses. Better vacations. Better schools for their kids. Better everything. Her voice cracked harder now. I felt like if we slowed down even once, people would see we were failing. Daniel looked at her sadly. "Who cares what people think?" Vanessa laughed bitterly through tears. "Easy for you to say. You never felt judged the way women do." Part of me understood that more than she realized. Women are taught from an early age to perform stability. Beautiful homes. Beautiful children. Beautiful marriages. Beautiful lives. Even when they are quietly falling apart. But understanding someone's fear does not erase the damage they create because of it. The kitchen grew quiet again until suddenly we heard the front door open upstairs. Footsteps. Then Emily appeared near the staircase holding her backpack against her chest. The moment she saw the paperwork spread across the kitchen table, her expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. Like part of her already knew this day was coming.